This conference will now be recorded.
The way I've tackled this topic is I've done a little bit of a study up and I've found that there are three main theories on the rapture. And so I'd love to just take us all through those three theories. We'll go through the biblical backing to each of those three theories, and we'll hopefully be able to compare them all together, compare them to scripture, and come out with our own understanding of what we think it might mean. So no better place to start than in 1 Thessalonians, the only verse we've actually got that vaguely resembles rapture, because rapture is an invented word. The idea of rapture comes from this verse in 1 Thessalonians, and we're going to do quite a lot of verse flicking. So what I'll do is we'll read around the room, starting at Josiah, and we'll just do 4 verse 16 to 17. So if you read that out and then just remember where the reading's up to, and when we get to verses, you'll know who's next to read it out.
Then we which are alive remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord.
Awesome, thank you. So yeah, we've got this verse. That's it. So this verse is those that are still alive and left will be caught up together with them in the clouds and meet the Lord in the air. This is the verse that has got so much commentary. It's got theories on it, and I've picked the main three. So the first theory we've got here, this is a very traditional, I think evangelical view on rapture. And that theory is this rapture is an event that happens pre-Christ's return to stand on the Mount of Olives. And what happens is God's children get raptured up into the sky to meet Jesus, and then they get held and kept safe while there's 7 years of tribulation on the earth. Now, even of this theory in itself, there are 3 different shoots of this theory. The first theory is that you get called up and you're kept safe for 7 years of tribulation. The second theory is you have 3.5 years of tribulation, and then you get called up and kept safe for the last 3.5 years. And then the third theory is you're there for the whole 7 years, sorry about it, and then you get called up in rapture. So this theory has those 3, but we'll just talk about it as a whole. So that's where it starts. But where do they get this idea from? And where they get the idea from is found in Matthew 24 and 29:31. So if I could get the next person to look that up, and we'll have a read through.
Matthew 24, 21:31. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of heaven to the other.
Thank you. So yeah, we've got this verse, and on face value reading, you can see why people have linked 1 Thessalonians to this verse in Matthew. So that's the first verse of backing that this theory has. So yeah, I can see a few thoughtful thoughts going on in people's minds, and this is the goal. I'm trying to get people thinking about why do they have this theory. I'm giving you the verses that people have come up with for their backing, and then we can have a discussion as to why not we do or don't agree. So the reason they believe, obviously, the 7 years of tribulation, that can be found in Daniel 9, verse 27.
And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation and the determined shall be full of it.
There we go. Yeah, that's so we're getting the 7 weeks prophecy in Daniel, and then that's getting turned into 7 years for the classic day to a year calculation, and then we're seeing this abomination that causes desolation. On cause at the temple, and we've had some talks covering some of these verses, and we've heard some good thoughts on that as well recently. And so these are the 2 main verses that I've managed to find to scratch up evidence for why people could come to these conclusions. So let's just have a look at that conclusion. So how someone could come to this conclusion. So the conclusion being that, so I'm going to be honest, I think the conclusion has been gotten to because people need to get to heaven somehow. So that's how the conclusions come to be, is to get to heaven, you need Jesus to come back almost and take you to heaven. And they'll take you to the verses also. Jesus says, I'm going to my Father's house to prepare a room for you. And my Father's house has many rooms. So yeah. So that's also the quote they'll take you to. That being the evidence to say, Jesus is gone, he's preparing a place, he's going to come almost back and scoop up his children to go to that awesome place. And then 7 years later, he's going to return, and that's when the 1,000-year millennium starts. So I'd love to.
I think that everyone comes back down at that point.
I don't think they do. I think at that point, when the millennium starts, they're ruling from heaven.
Apart from Jesus who's down.
But from Jesus who's down. So yeah, you're already pulling this argument apart. Thank you. There's already some confused looks around the room. So I'd love to open it up to a little bit of discussion and a little bit of, because I think everyone's confusion is justified. And I think we should talk about what is confusing about it, and then we can move on to the next topic, and we'll do the thing. We'll talk about the confusion, and then we can justify it. And hopefully by the end of this class, we can go through each of these things and come out with a justified answer together. So yeah, that's right. How does that work when we know that the saints are supposed to rule with Christ when Christ comes back to set up the kingdom in that millennium? So if people are gone to this other place, it seems very weird to be called away and then come back, or whether they're ruling in that place. So that's a discrepancy. It seems very weird. We've got some other thoughts.
Why do you have to go to heaven? Where's that come from? Or is that a basic?
That's a talk for another time.
That's a
Yeah,
given.
that's a given, and yeah, that's a talk for another time. There are a few talks for another time coming from this topic, and the reason for that is because it's based on one verse in 1 Thessalonians. So I'm trying to cover specifically this topic tonight. But
So I suppose in that would, like in the set of verses, where getting to heaven comes in is that when 1 Thessalonians 4 says, those that lie on remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds, so shall they be with the Lord. That being caught up together with them in the clouds is equated with going to heaven. I don't know, I think that's where to support, like in that concept, that's where that would be equated.
that would be, yeah.
I think that's the question I'm asking.
Yeah.
But it doesn't actually say they go anywhere beyond the clouds.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that's where it's.
But that's where
Everyone
it's equated
assumes
to.
that people aren't going to just down the cloud.
So yeah, for those online, the discussion is
It's a major assumption.
the assumption is for heaven going is that the clouds is heaven in this assumption. Yeah, so that's right. And even in 1 Thessalonians, it talks about, and so they shall be with the Lord forever. And that's an interesting statement as well, considering they're going with Christ, and then Christ is coming back to the earth in 7 years' time, whether that being forever or not. Good question. But yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on this theory, but it is a major theory amongst in the world, obviously quite a major theory, but I don't want to spend too long on it. We'll get on to our next theory, theory number 2. And theory number 2 is that 1 Thessalonians 4:17 is symbolic. And that's drawing a picture of the saints coming together as a flock. So as we are tonight, we're joined together as a flock, as a community. And so when Christ has come and he's exalted, that we'll all join together, the saints will all join together in places as part of the flock. So where does this idea come from? And there's two major, three major things here. The first reasoning for it is that the word caught up. So obviously, for this to be true, for the statement to be true, we need to reconcile the statement caught up, because if it's symbolic, we don't necessarily, the symbol isn't necessarily being caught up, as it were, which is true. The saying in 1 Thessalonians, being caught up, is not a great translation. In fact, the word that's used doesn't even have anything to do with the direction up. The word that's used is actually, I really liked the translation. I've got it later on in the slides, but I don't want to skip through them all yet to show you. But there was a translation, was to be taken away with great expectation, like to receive a gift with great expectation, that sort of idea. And so it's that idea of grabbing and taking with great expectation, or to be, yeah, to be pulled away. So it's not a caught up gently into the cloud, as it were. It's quite a, and we're going to move. It's a snatch and grab. We have to move at this point. So that's the first reasoning behind this theory is when Christ returns, we're going to move, and we're going to move fast. So the reasoning being, we're going to move fast into our communities, into our flock. So the next verse we're going to read is Hebrews 12, verse 1, to see why and how we can get this idea even further.
Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us.
Perfect. So you'll all notice there was a word cloud there, and a bunch of witnesses. So the theory takes this verse and says, hey, look, in 1 Thessalonians, we're talking about, we've covered this first part. Those that are still alive will be caught up, and we've discussed this, will be snatched away. We'll have to move real quick. And then we need to get to this next part and gather with them in the clouds. So for it to be a symbol, we reconcile this with clouds being this great cloud of witnesses. And so we have this idea of we're moving quickly and joining this great cloud of witnesses. And then we have this next thing to reconcile, and meet the Lord in the air. And obviously, for it to be a symbol, it's not literally the air, right? So we have this next verse, Ephesians 2, verse 2. Let's read that.
Verse 2, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world, and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the Spirit, who is now at those who are disobedient.
Perfect. All right, so Ephesians 2, verse 2, again, you'll notice the word in here, ear, right? And what that word is implying here is this idea of rulership. this idea of being a ruler, and so the theory comes from, so that if we reread the verse with these verses in mind, and we can see how this theory comes to be, we can read, after that, those who are still alive and are left will be snatched away, together with them all the multitudes, to meet the Lord of power. That sounds awesome, and it sounds like it could be legit. Yet there are a few things that also don't work with this theory. Do I have a next slide? Yeah, here we go. So we've got the symbol being caught up definition. I thought that might be a useful table there for people to see how we're reconciling these verses and putting it all together. Yet, if we look deeper into those verses that are used to explain it in this way, there is some discrepancies. So if we come back to Hebrews 12, let's have a quick look at what it says there. So Hebrews 12, verse 1 again. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And this verse would be perfect for this example if it were the same word clouds, but it's not. It's the same English word, but it's actually a very different Greek word. So it's not the same word, so therefore we can't use it in this way to substitute as a lightning. So that's that first verse, which is, it can't be used in that way because it's a different word. The next verse, Ephesians 2, verse 2, and that reads, actually I'll read from verse 1. As you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live, when you followed the ways of his word, when you used to live, when you followed the ways of this world, and of the ruler and kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. So the interesting thing about this verse is we have the idea of air, and if we try to take it as ruler of the air, the ruler of the air in this verse is the ruler of disobedience. And we can't, Jesus is not the ruler of disobedience, he's the ruler of the righteous. And so trying to translate this verse again to say that we're going to meet the ruler of disobedience, because that's what we're translating as air, doesn't quite have the same ring to it as it did before. So that's the second theory, and people might have some comments on that. There may be more verses that I haven't found. There may be things that I haven't thought about, and I'm happy to take some comments, but maybe we'll leave that till later on and we can have some more discussion. Let people have some time to dwell on it, and I'll let you know the third theory, the rapture. And so the third theory is the rapture is as described in 1 Thessalonians 4, and it's literal, where the righteous will be pulled away to meet Jesus at his return. And so we have a literal look at this verse. So there's a few things we obviously need to reconcile and figure out. We have this idea of being caught up, we have this idea of clouds, and we have this idea of air, which we've gone through pretty much for all three of these examples of theories. And because it's the one verse, we need to have a look at these words and see what they mean, how they work. So we're going to start with caught up. So here we go. We've got the Greek there, harpazo, I think. And so these are the Strong's definitions. To seize or carry off by force, to claim for oneself eagerly, or to snatch out or away. So yeah, to claim for oneself eagerly, that's the one that I thought is quite fitting really for the return of Christ, is he's claiming for himself eagerly. I thought it was an awesome translation. But when you look at this definition, it reminds you an awful lot about Lot. You see Sodom and Gomorrah, we have the sinful people around, and then we have some angels come and visit Lot. And the angels come and they tell Lot, you need to get out of the city for it's going to be destroyed. And the record tells us that Lot hesitated. And at that point of hesitation, the angels grabbed Lot by the hand and pulled him until he was out of the city. And then by that point, he started going on his own accord. And I think that's going to be, in some ways, very similar. Or could be seen as quite similar, of this idea of it being caught up. It sounds very gentle, but it's this idea of being pulled out from where you are. A full movement, just like Lot had happened to him. And I think the idea of thinking about Lot in this context is quite fitting in terms of getting pulled out from a land of evil and getting saved from the destruction that's about to happen to it. So this idea of being caught up. So again, the theory number 2, the same definition applies and the same reason. The clouds. So the idea of clouds being Shekinah glory. So not the idea of going to heaven, but the idea of God's glory, the Shekinah glory. And we can find the Shekinah glory if we just quick succession look up those verses, and we can just have a bit of an idea about where the Shekinah glory comes from and what it is. So yeah, just have a quick read around of these verses.
When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking fire top and a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces.
The angel of God who had been traveling in front of Israel's army drew behind them. The pillar of cloud was moved from in front and stood behind them.
The glory of the Lord resided on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered the sea. On the 7th day, he talked to Moses from within the cloud.
And the priests withdrew from the holy place that fell filled the temple of the Lord, and the priests could not perform their service because of the glory of the Lord filled the temple. And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself. The brightness was about it, and out of the midst thereof is the colour of amber, out of the midst of the fire.
All right, awesome. So yeah, these are the idea. This is all the idea of God's glory filling these places each time. And so the first quote there, Genesis 15, it's described as the fiery pot with the smoke. But then you see that resemblance in the pillar of fire and the cloud. And then we get through in the progression of those verses, you can see, and especially in 1 Kings, it's a really good example of the cloud filling the temple for the glory of God was there in that verse, as really interesting.
Does the original indicate that the clouds is the Shekinah glory, as opposed to literal clouds in the sky?
The original what part?
Whatever they
These-
put it as.
These are this First Thessalonians. You're getting too far ahead. All right, I better move on quick. Yeah, you're right. That's exactly right. What the verses you've got here are, and again, a discrepancy, right? The verses we've got here are all Old Testament. So we can't say that the Hebrew is then comparable to the Greek. It's exactly the same as saying, have you got
This Shekinah word, where does that come from?
I did some research on that and I didn't write it down. I have a place written notes on Shekinah glory and that's blank.
Is it a Bible word? Or is just somebody like it?
The Hebrew, yeah, Hebrew. It's,
Yeah, I can see it's Hebrew. It
Yeah.
finishes with AH. so
Yeah,
That's a good starting point. Where did it come? Where is it?
So
The
Shekinah,
verses use it.
so yeah, it's about the glory. I think in 1 Kings 8, you'll be able to see that the cloud filling in and the glory there, I think. We can probably have a discussion on that. If you look up Strong's even, you'll probably be able to find something there. Yeah.
Why can't we just say God's glory?
God's glory. Yeah, we can say that. Let's say that. God's glory. God's glory. So it's yeah. So we have these verses, and as we said, we can't reconcile these verses with the New Testament because it's changing languages. So it doesn't quite fit either. But if we look at 1 Corinthians 10, verse 1, I think it does a, oh, we've got another.
So just before you get there, so I guess just on Shekinah, so I believe Shekinah, going from completely wrong, I believe Shekinah means dwelling glory, which is why it's used in that way. I think those
In the tabernacle, temple.
I'm not 100% sure it's actually a word that's used in the Bible. I might be, I'm not 100% sure, but that's why it's connected with that idea of that, because the glory dwells in the most holy place in the tabernacle and the temple inside this. So that's where that, like, I guess that idea comes from. What I was just going to say is in terms of linking the words, I know like those are Hebrew words, the way that you would look at that is you would look at, well, how is that Greek word that occurs in 1 Thessalonians 4 used in the Septuagint? So, like the Septuagint translation, it's not a inspired print, but like that's how you look at it. So, well, is the Greek word that's the clouds or whatever in 1 Thessalonians 4? How's that Greek word used in the Old Testament? I think used in those passages. Part 2.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I think yeah, you're probably bang on the money there. But yes, if we look at 1 Corinthians here, verse 10, it's a good, it's a link here between the New Testament and the Old Testament.
I'd always understood the Shekinah glory was, it's an Old Testament thing where I think the children of Israel dwelt in the presence of the glory of God. And the Shekinah glory shone around them. That's was my basic understanding of Shekinah glory. So therefore it doesn't exist unless people are actually dwelling in it. And of course the children of Israel, various stages of the history where they dwelt. So it's not, so therefore the Shekinah glory is a presence.
Yeah.
Page in Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Shekinah.
Yeah, so we've got a comment here online talking about Shekinah from Ruth. Shekinah is not used in the Bible, but is only in the Mishnah and Talmud, and it means dwelling or presence. So yeah, just that idea of where God's glory dwells, which is, yeah, really interesting.
Usually seen in either a cloud or smoke and fire or light.
Yeah. So those verses where God's glory is.
And often accompanied with the cherubim and withers.
Yes, yeah, which is another topic entirely, but funnily enough, all these things link in, which is really interesting. But yeah, if we read 1 Corinthians 10, verse 1, and we'll see where we get this link from Old Testament to New Testament.
Can I do verse 2 and 3 as well?
Sure, yeah.
I think it's needed.
Yeah.
Maybe. For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. That's one answer.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So that's. Sorry, I was just muting someone online. Yeah.
So is the assumption that because God had the cloud and fire in the wilderness wandering, that that's the same as 1 Thessalonians 4?
Yes. So this is where it gets interesting. So we talked before about how our quote about clouds in Hebrews was a different word. But the quote here in 1 Corinthians is the same word, cloud. So the same cloud word is used here and in Thessalonians. And so if the writer to the Thessalonians is quoting the cloud taking the Israelites through the sea, so we get this pillar of fire and the cloud, we get this idea, we get this link, because if we've got a quote here in the Bible that's saying you can link this word cloud in the Old Testament, then therefore we can put it into this context, because we do also have a Greek context for it. So this idea of God's glory and the idea of God's glory dwelling that we get through the Old Testament in all these different places, we can then attribute to this idea of clouds in 1 Thessalonians. So that's where we get to here. And now this is where it gets even more interesting. The first mention of the Greek word being used in the New Testament. And we have these three places it gets used. Before we look it up, does anyone have a guess what those three places might be?
Is it the cloud that covers Jesus' ascension?
Ooh, no, not quite.
I've cheated.
Yeah. Yeah, feel free to, we should read them out. We should read them out. If we just do the next three people to read out the verses.
This is the transfiguration. While he was still speaking, but a bright cloud enveloped him, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him."
Anyone have a guess what the next verse might be? All right, does anyone? Yes. Oh, that's been cheeky. If we read that one out as well, we might as well read the three of them out.
And the cloud appeared and covered him, and the voice came from the cloud. "This is my son whom I love, listen to him."
And working on 34, while he thus spake, there came a cloud and overshadowed them, and they feared as they entered into the cloud.
Perfect. Yeah, so we have, it's really interesting, the first mention of this word cloud that is used in 1 Thessalonians is used for Jesus in Transfiguration. And the first time, and it's the first mention in 3 of the Gospels for this word really stunning to me is that we have this picture of Christ up on the mountain with the close disciples and this vision, the transfiguration, where Jesus is changed and we have this speaking from God in this glory in that moment is quite substantial when you think about how this word is going to be used over and over and over and over again. So the study on the rapture has turned into a study on clouds. But we've got this idea of clouds being used so for God's glory here in the transfiguration. And then you're right, Josiah, we have the same word being used for Jesus when he goes, when he's called up to heaven. And then when Jesus says, the same way you've seen me go, the angels say, the same way you saw him go is the same way he'll return, and things like that. So when you put that verse in context with 1 Thessalonians as well, saying the same way you saw him leave is the same way he will return, again, more proof that the first theory is discounted, because we have this word clouds used in 1 Thessalonians saying that Jesus is going to return when these clouds are present, when this cloud of glory appears.
So you're saying that the cloud in Acts chapter 1 that took Jesus up was this glory cloud. It wasn't a rain cloud or a cirrus or a woolpack. It was this glory cloud.
Yes.
But it could have looked like a regular.
Well, I'm sure it looks somewhat like a cloud for it to be described like a cloud, but yes, I'm saying that it's God's glory.
Well, this is just personal. I've long wanted 1 Thessalonians 4 to relate somehow to Jesus going up in Acts chapter 1, but I haven't known how to do it.
Yeah, so this idea of clouds, yeah, the same word cloud, at the very least, is the same word used. So yes, and it's used reoccurringly. And so the idea of Jesus coming back and this idea of clouds is obviously, it's not the first time both of those have been used in verses before. But it's the first time this idea has been used in verses about the saints, about us. Yes.
And if you're going to be revealed to the world in a way that nobody else ever could be, that's the way for it to be done.
Yeah.
Could the cloud be a crowd of people? Because I had heard that suggestion once before.
Well, I'm sure there will be a crowd of people.
Oh, yes. A crowd. But it just talks of a cloud.
Yes, yeah, so it's not the same Greek word as used in Hebrews that talks about a crowd. So I'm sure there will be a crowd of people, obviously. So this theory being that we're going to be snatched away to where Jesus is. So in the idea that Jesus is returning to Jerusalem, that we'll be snatched away to be with him there. And so there will be a crowd for sure, but this cloud of glory that's going to envelop all the saints is going to be quite a special thing, and I think quite noticeable. Not just like a rain cloud or something else. Yeah. But as we said, there were three things to talk about. Oh no, yeah, that was it. Yeah.
What about the ear?
The ear, yeah, I didn't put a slide up for that, which was annoying. But yes, so the idea of the ear. So this third theory is just saying the ear is a literal meaning of in the ear, as in will be whisked away and we will meet him in the ear, as opposed to the symbolic of theory 2, which is saying that the ear is just an ear of power, so to speak. We will be literally whisked off and possibly uncomfortably whisked off to be with Christ, and then we'll be there at that time. How much time do we have left? I think I'm going to have to sum up, and then we'll open up for discussion, because I think the important part about tonight is what I haven't talked about yet. So the important part of the rapture, well, okay, let's get rid of that word. The important part of what to expect is in 1 Thessalonians, and I want us to read it again, but I'll read from verse 13. Brothers, we do not want you to be ignorant about those who fall asleep, or to grieve like the rest of men who have no hope. We believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. According to the Lord's own word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left till the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, those who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage each other with these words. This is the whole point of these verses, isn't it? To encourage each other with these words. And so what is the point then of this passage? The point is to give hope of a resurrection. It's to be able to say to those that are still alive, you will see firsthand, if any of us are still alive at the coming of Christ, we will see with our own eyes, because we will not have been snatched away at that point, the dead raised. Isn't that amazing? The dead are going to be raised, and we're told to encourage each other with this idea that because you're alive doesn't mean you're going to miss out on seeing this great resurrection. That means you're going to witness this great resurrection. And so that means when someone falls asleep, we can encourage each other with these words. We can say, because I am still alive. We all can say, because I am still alive, I will get to witness the resurrection. But when it comes and I'm not alive, well then, good too, because you'll be in that resurrection. And so that's where the encouragement comes from in these verses. And that's what these verses are really truly about. And a lot of weight gets put onto these verses about getting caught up into the clouds and meeting the Lord together in the air, which is an awesome picture. But the real purpose is to saying we don't need to mourn like the rest of the world, because we are. And that's what these verses. So what to expect? Well, we should expect to encourage each other with these verses. We should expect a resurrection. That's what we should expect. And we should expect to see the resurrection. Anyone that is alive should expect to see that. And so that's waiting in great expectation. That's what to expect. So what to expect? The rapture. Maybe you weren't all, you were hoping I wasn't going to go to just that small, simple end to it, but that's what we need to expect. But I'm totally happy for us to all have a chat about the three, because I know there's a lot to talk about in the three theories on rapture. And as I say, these are things I did some reading on. I had a lot of Bible flicking and word definitions, but yeah, I did reading on these three theories. So yeah, feel free to, should we? No, we'll have some conversation and then we'll close and wrap.
Yeah, I like your conclusion to it, because we can get so caught up in the nitty-gritty arguments about certain things if we miss the big picture, the most important bit of the picture, which is Christ's return and resurrection and hope.
Yeah.
That's right, that's really all it is resurrection. Like it talks a lot about resurrection. It talks about the mortal state and immortal state. But there's not a lot really of definition of the transition. It's sketchy at best. And we accept that the Bible is written, divinely inspired. But Paul is writing this to the previous slides. And he's trying to make sense of this concept. So he's done the best he can with that verse that we read out. But whatever it is, we have to accept it as simple children. And at the time, we know gainsaying it. We won't go and say, hopefully we get there. Hopefully, well, we won't be able to say, well, that wasn't my understanding of the scriptures that Paul gave us. These few verses in here, I'm sorry, Lord, but I'm disappointed. We've got to make sure this is just a concept. There's life, there's a promise, held out the prospect, resurrection. Exactly how that comes about, whether the dead are risen first, because that's Paul's statement here. We can't be absolutely dogmatic about it. Just that we accept the word and the prospect held out as little children. And it's not inconsistent with that. So Paul, if he's stating something which is factual at that time, he must have had a special revelation. Now, he does say, I was the last to see the Lord. And obviously, Jesus did tell Paul a whole bunch of things. But he didn't go away for 40 days and 40 nights like Moses did. Somehow, he absorbed all this information and got recorded and wrote it down. So, Paul's opinion, not disputing finally inspired words of Thessalonians or any part of the Bible will translate it correctly. It's Paul's attempt to try and encourage those people in it of whatever that transition might be, because we must all think about it. We must think, well, okay, you're working away, I'm pulling carrots, I'm doing whatever around the place, and should I be doing this? One day, there'll be two people pulling carrots, one will be taking, one will be there. So Paul's trying to explain that transition and really thinking to ourselves, what is that transition really like? It's not until you actually have to do a job, you lay out the tools to get to the goal that you want, you might realise you're missing the tool, you're missing an idea, key or something. We can't really worry about that at the resurrection. God's got that all in him. We have to accept that by faith. So it's a very hard thing to describe or define the concept. I know what you're saying with respect to clouds. We've gone through all sorts of things. But whatever the clouds were referring to at the Transfiguration, or Moses with the burning bush, or lots of things that happened, it's something that was unusual, remarkable, and left a lasting impression on the witnesses that were there. We can only guess or imagine in the physical bottle that God's given us what that might be. If you look out the still sea on a dark night, you happen to be on a boat and you're rowing a rowboat and there's phosphorescence. You didn't know about it, but you row and the sea lights up and you can see into that depth and it looks a little bit like God's glory being revealed. So I dare say that the cloud that the three saw at the transfiguration was just something that separated them momentarily from all their other thoughts, that would have left a lasting impression on them. But they couldn't tell other people because I think they're crazy. As Paul said, I knew a man who was caught up with the third heaven. I can't tell you about that. It's not lawful. I'm locked up. So there's lots of concepts in there that the Bible tries to explain. Paul's doing his damnedest, Timothy and Silas. And he's given us that exactly what will happen at the resurrection, what to expect. It's good that we discuss it. We can't be dogmatic about it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to me, when you look at Acts 1 verse 11, where it talks about how Jesus was taken up in the cloud, and the angel says to the question what's going on, and they said, as you see him go, so you will see him come. And in those verses that you quoted, Jeremy, and it talks there, verse 16, for the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with the trumpet of God, and then verse 17, and it talks about the clouds. So therefore, it seems to me that whatever that cloud was that took Jesus up, at verse, that's 1 verse 11, is the same cloud by which he will return, because that's exactly what the angel said. The same way that you see him go, he will come. And the other point, which I think is interesting, is that it says it's got three withs. In verse 16, it says, with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet of God. Now that talks to me about angels. So therefore, his return will be absolutely unmistakable, because there will be these angels that will be blowing trumpets, and the shout, because it says the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with the trumpet of God. It seems to me that the return of Christ will be absolutely unmistakable to the world. They will say, God, goodness me, this is extraordinary in the highest sense of the word.
Still be lazy.
Oh, yes, they will. They will be, because we know, we live in a fake news era now, don't we? But it seems to me that for those who believe anyway, it will be totally unstable.
Well, actually adding to that, actually, with the shout and sound of the trumpet, it also says this coming will be like lightning shining from the east to the west. And, if you are the glory, there's kind of glory again. But also, when you see exactly the same picture on Mount Sinai, the cloud covered the mountain, the lightning shone out of it everywhere. There was the rumblings, the thunder, the trumpet. It was all happening all at once. And like the ground was shaking in the sheets. And like Jeremy says, I'd often thought the Rapture was caught up. Sort of the basic principle, but gentle caught up and be with him forever. But sure, snatched away and then taken to this bright cloud. And even the disciples on the mountain were terrified. It says, so were all the Israelites. It's going to be a scary experience.
I think the other thing that's interesting is that Matthew 24, verse 31, Jesus actually affirms what Paul's saying, seems to me. If you read Matthew 24, 31, it seems to me to be, Paul seems to be quoting Jesus there. It says,
it's interesting.
And she sent his angel, great sound of a trumpet, which will gather together his elect on 4 winds from one end to the other. That seems to me this would be another way of saying exactly what Paul's saying.
Can I make a comment on the Hebrews 12 one? It should be on the end of the previous chapter because it starts with therefore.
Mhm.
So the cloud of witnesses, which is a word that can be throng, is the people in Hebrews 11, the faithful people. So that satisfies me. So then I thought, where do we get this word rapture from? So I looked it up.
Yeah.
Rapture is derived from Middle French rapture via the medieval Latin raptura, seizing, kidnapping, which derives from the Latin raptus, a carrying off. And I thought the way we've used rapture apart from this one, in English today, it's all, oh, she was in rapture, she was so happy or so excited, which, yeah, sort of, but I wouldn't put them together.
I remember years ago, when I was Sunday school superintendent, we used to get, you ask the kids questions about things, and some of them are absolutely hilarious. I heard my brother say, and he was doing the same thing, and he asked that, does anyone know about the rapture? And, oh, it's a big bird.
That's like Adam and Eve being driven out of the garden in a car with a Pontius the Pilate that some kid in our Sunday school drew.
So when it says to meet the Lord in the air, what would be like in the theory 3? What were you saying that was?
It's just
What we're talking about.
that's just it is what it says, I guess.
A-E-R, air,
Yeah.
AER.
what we've read.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just to
So,
go
like,
with the theory.
you know, when we think about like the coming of Christ, you know, gathering together to be with Him. So I know that the end place, of course, is so shall we ever be with the Lord.
Mm.
We've been taken away to be with the Lord.
Yeah.
But we believe that there's a kingdom coming on the earth,
Yes.
not in the air.
Yes.
So like, I guess I see what I see that, you know, we've talked about like it and look at what like one of the ones Barry said. We talked like a granular way about us and about, and not so much about air, but a little bit about air and about being snatched away. But that still gives the overall impression of ending up in an ethereal place, like you're ending up in the air.
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah. So.
I guess my question is like, so having looked at that sort of granular way, why would Paul use imagery like that for this purpose?
So I think the best explanation I could give you with this is obviously the idea of being caught up is probably obviously a big misconception.
Sure.
And so the idea of up, and then you put air in the same sentence, you think,
Clouds.
and clouds in the same sentence, you suddenly start thinking aerial, you start thinking like, let's go up in a spaceship. But I think if we read that verse with the new concepts that we're putting in, with the idea of a cloud of glory, as Jesus is coming down towards the earth, because this is obviously something that's repeated again and again and again. We know this picture, this trumpet sound, loud noise, Jesus coming, the lightning from, everyone's going to see it. So we know that picture. So the idea of the ear is traveling through the ear to Jesus. It doesn't necessarily mean up in the ear, but through. And so I think the idea of through the ear and quickly, like this idea of snatched away quickly, go hand in hand. Sort of like if you start thinking about traveling through the ear, you're not thinking you're going slowly. So I think this idea of moving fast, and so it's to be with Christ. And so my opinion on that then would be through the ear to get to where Christ is. So not necessarily up in the clouds, but to get to where Christ is.
The idea was just to meet him.
Yes, yeah.
And I think you've got a good picture of it in Acts, again, in Acts 1, where it says he was going up in the clouds. That was a means to getting to a certain place, and obviously coming back again through that cloud, Shapona, or whatever you would call it, is again to go to get to a destination, not be hovering in a.
Yes, yeah.
Is it transit?
It's, yeah. It's sort of like, it's like saying, I'm going to meet someone at the airport. It doesn't mean we're going to stay the night there. It means it's a pickup point. So like, and that's the interesting thing about all three theories, is that there is this idea of a meeting point. All three of these theories have this idea of meeting. It's just the first theory, the idea is you meet in the air and then you all keep going to wherever heaven is. Theory number 2 is you all meet, like we all meet as a crowd, and then obviously at some point we go to meet Christ. And then the third theory being we're going to get pulled to meet Christ, and everyone else will be there too, for sure.
So Jeremy, you didn't get to Revelation 1 verse 7.
That is written down as one of my quotes, yes.
which says this: he's coming with the glory clouds.
Mhm.
That's the word.
Yes,
clouds.
that's right.
And every eye will see him, even those who pierced him. And all the peoples of the earth will mourn because of him. So I've got in my brain from somewhere way back, I think it's out of Eureka, that there's Jesus' return to the believers, and then there's Jesus' return revealing to the world. And I fancy this is talking about revealing to the world, also the Revelation 1.
Yeah, so I think,
Because it's
I
those
think,
who pierced him, well, they're not the good guys.
yeah, that idea of Jesus revealing himself to the believers and then to the world, I think comes from this first theory on rapture. It dates very far back. And so I think that's possibly where that idea comes from.
Those who pierced him, isn't that Israel?
Yeah, I think there is, I think like when we think about the coming or revelation of Jesus, I think that like that is the case, that Jesus is not like one revelation of Jesus to everybody at the same instant. You know, Jesus revealed to the saints, Jesus revealed to Israel, Jesus revealed to the world, like those, you know, those revealings of Jesus happen, but they're not the same event. Because you've got because the saints are part of the process for those the other state for the other states. So it's already happened. One happening in the sky. But
yeah.
And why not? Because the planet's taken 6,000 years so far, so it's not unreasonable that it would be staged over a period of time. So God's the ultimate stage manager of this whole thing. So it's not unreasonable that it will be done in stages, whatever this transition is from mortality to immortality, Jesus being revealed, and all those sort of things. As I was sort of alluding to before about practicalities of trying to complete a project, one must think, well, how would a mere mortal get immortality and re-education to come back and educate a bunch of morons? You know, first of all, you're going to have to somehow be given authority, wisdom and understanding and all sorts of things. I'm not sure what the government might do for themselves. I definitely need a transformation of sorts.
Yeah, well, it is interesting thinking about the verses that were quoted earlier. 2 men will be in field, one will be taken, the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the handmill, one will be taken, the other left. In those verses, if you think about it in the context you're talking about, Jackie, very possibly, like, some taken, some left. The ones left have no idea what's happening.
Life goes on, we'll get a mistake.
Yeah, so it could well be.
Charles Fraser told me once that he showed me his business card and it had a quote about the return of Jesus on the back. And he told me that he told his employers if there was any time they couldn't find him and he hadn't fronted them, this was before mobile phones, it was because Jesus had returned. It wasn't that he was spiking out of work. Just thought that was great.
Yeah, good on them.
And you must have heard my story about the two sisters in Tasmania, where there's an earthquake. And the mother immediately says, "Come on, dear, it's the Lord." And they walk out of the house to the gate. That's being ready.
Yeah, well, let's keep them watch, right? Let's...
River walking the gate in Wellington.
Sorry?
If you walk through the gate quite a bit in Wellington. It was 10 years.
Yeah, but they don't have this great sentence. It's very, very unusual.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'll get Charles to close in prayer and then we can keep discussion going.